Hey guys, it's the Friction here, Tiger Tank 12. I've been calling me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks, where we're today taking a look at one of the worst Tier 9 heavy tanks in the game, and it actually is a premium one. And yeah, I'm pretty ashamed to admit that I spent a lot of resources to buy this thing, and it has not paid off. Now, before we get into any of the characteristics, hear me out. I'm a very big fan of American heavy tanks. I have 3 marked my E5, I have 3 marked my T54, I have 3 marked probably another American heavy. I've enjoyed most of them, almost all of them. The Concept 1B is great, barely play it. AE Phase 1 is great, barely play that. But, but the T54 heavy tank, now I have tried to make this thing work. I played 73 games and I barely reached 45% win rate. And I can tell you, it's not getting better. I have had 20 games that I lost in a row when I was playing this bad boy. And it's just one of the most frustrating experiences I have had in World of Tanks in a very, very long time. Now, I'm not the best player in the world. There are certainly players out there that will make this tank work for them, but I somehow just cannot find the right place. I cannot find the right balance to make this vehicle work. What am I talking about? I'm talking about one of the biggest issue with American heavies, and that is the cupola on top. This cupola has basically made this tank so incredibly frustrating that it's just not a lot of fun to play since it is a heavy tank. Now, there's another vehicle at tier 9 that has a very similar feature, and it was given out for free, and it's the Patent the Tank. And you can see the cupolas on both of these things are basically identical. They are similar, they're almost one-to-one, and the only difference is the placement. The one on the 54 Heavy is a bit further back, the Patent the Tank, it's further on the left. But either way, both of them extremely exposed, very easy to hit, and basically it's a guaranteed penetration most of the time. So whenever you see this thing, you don't have to aim anywhere except for the cupola. So what do you do when you're playing it as a heavy? Are there any redeeming features to this vehicle? There are some, but they are not good enough for me really to recommend this as a premium at tier 9 that I would kind of recommend for anyone to pick up. So what's so bad about this thing? Let's start with the decent things before we go to the bad ones. I don't want to be bashing on this tank non-stop. Well, first and foremost, you have a 120mm gun that I'm going to show you guys real fast. We have the gun right here. We need the turret in a second as well. So let's just pick all of these boxes. The gun is 120mm in diameter, and you have average damage of 450. Now that's pretty damn impressive. Most American heavies only have 400 damage per single shot. You get an additional 50 HP of damage with that shot. You have a high explosive round that is not the best in terms of pen, but 60mm of penetration, you can probably make that work against most lightly armored vehicles, such as the Scorpion Gs, such as the Waffenträger of Panzer IV, or, you know, any of the light tanks. So, yeah, this one does 530 damage per shot on average, and that's pretty impressive. But as soon as we go to the penetration, the impressive things do tend to disappear. You can see 240mm of penetration with the standard AP shell. At least the shell velocity is decent with 1,067 meters per second. You only have 300mm of penetration with heat rounds. Now only, we have to put that in quotation marks because 300mm of pen is still fairly good for most vehicles. But you're a tier 9, you're going to be facing tier 10 tanks, and 300mm will not be enough in certain situations where you have to go up against super heavy vehicles. So I did notice that the heat rounds do become a little bit obsolete against certain super heavy vehicles. Yeah, 300mm is not enough anymore. The reload time of the gun is atrocious. 13 seconds to fire off a single shell. You can see it shows in the DPM 2077. Dispersion is god-awful. This is one of the worst guns to play. It basically feels like you're playing one of those Death Stars, but you do not have the Alpha. You basically just have all of the bad things, which is terrible dispersion, horrible aim time, and just overall a gun that does not perform very well. So, the gun is trash. We have a very big weak spot on top. You do have 12 degrees of gun depression, which is fabulous, I have to say that. But you basically have very bad gun traverse speed. Your turret is very large on the side. It's a very big profile. It's a very high tank. If we compare it to the Object 777, obviously that's a bit unfair. But if we compare it to the Concept 1B, the T54 Heavy is almost twice the size of the version 2, the Object 77. And yeah, it's about 1.5 times the Concept 1B. So, gun is not that great. You don't have good DPM. The only thing that is good about this gun is the 450 alpha damage. So that's not good. What about the armor? Well, the armor is decent. The turret armor on the front is 254. The side 76, the rear 76. That's basically what you expect of an American heavy tank. But that cupola basically takes away all of that 254 millimeters of armor and makes it go vanish. Same with the hull. The hull is 254 millimeters thick at the front, 76 on the side, 38 on the rear. Now, it is fairly easy to go through the lower plate, so as soon as you have the lower plate, you're going to be able to go through this thing. If you are on a slope, because of the 12 degrees of gun depression, you're actually going to be able to do a bit of damage to most of the enemy vehicles. But at the same time, because of the cupola on top, people will just be penning you either way. So the armor is negligible. You can basically ignore the armor because of that cupola on top. Mobility-wise, this thing is certainly not a tank to write home about. It's fairly sluggish. The specific power-to-weight ratio is close to the Chieftain Proto, but the Chieftain Proto is much smaller and the cupola is not as huge as it is with the T54 Heavy. The top speed is sadly only 34 kph per hour top speed, since, well, it's a heavy tank, you're not going to be mobile with this thing. Traverse speed with 35.59, that's what I've actually boosted quite a lot, because the vehicle was just turning way too slowly, and also the dispersion values on this thing are pretty horrific. So yeah, it's not mobile, it doesn't really offer a lot. Concealment, forget about it, it's a heavy tank. Spotting, on the other hand, having 400 meters base view range for a tier 9 heavy tank at, yeah, as a tier 9 heavy is pretty nice to have. Let me check real fast. I'm going to open the World of Tanks GG website so I can tell you guys the dispersion values, because Wargaming still haven't added the dispersion values, and I think the dispersion values are really important because they tell you exactly how good a tank is or how bad a tank is. So let me check that real quick. Where's the T54 Heavy? It is right here. Where the hell is it? Is it not on the site? I have to enter the tank. T54 Heavy. Okay, perfect, I found it. So the dispersion are at 0.2 when you're moving and 0.2 when you're turning your tracks. When you only turn a turret, though, on the other hand, it's only 0.10, so that is actually quite okay. But as you can see, I've tried with different configurations, and that is the configuration I've had the most luck with, at least in my personal humble opinion, because the tank is just very sluggish to play if you do not have the improved rotation mechanism on it. And also, you kind of need to have bounty aiming or just an aiming device because the dispersion is so bad, and you really want to improve upon that. This is a tank where you almost always have to run Case of Cola because your rate of fire is terrible and you want to improve that as well. So yeah, it's kind of a vehicle that really needs, well, it needs some love. I think probably if we would have a gun rammer on it, we would improve the DPM by quite a bit, by 10%. So in the end, that would help us tremendously in doing more damage. But at the same time, it would kind of mean that we're going to lose the accuracy we have or the dispersion values that are on the vehicle right now, and it's just something I do not want to change right now. I tried improved ventilations instead of the bounty aiming device to get a little bit of a DPM boost and also better accuracy, but it has not worked out in the way I hoped it would work out. So this is the equipment that I've been using. If you have better options, just tell me. I might be trying out a different setup, but this thing has been incredibly frustrating to play, even at distance sometimes. So maybe you should build a version where you're just going to be sitting further at the back instead of like right in the front line with the other vehicles, even though you have like really good gun depression angles. Okay, I think we've talked enough about the characteristics of this thing and why it's not a very lovable vehicle. Let's jump into some replays and I can show you guys just how bad of a tank it really is and where there might be some redeeming features. As always, we're going to have two replays that we're going to be featuring in this video today. Both of them I think are against lower tier opponents, max like tier 9, most of them tier 8s, because this thing really does not fare very well against tier 9s and tier 10 vehicles. And even at tier, let's say at tier 8 and tier 7, this tank is not impervious to damage, and it has a little bit of a tough time in certain situations. I think this replay does show off how incredibly awkward of a tank it is to play and how vulnerable it is, especially its very, very large size. We're playing on airfield. We're contesting the heavy tank alley, which is basically the D, C, and E line. And we're going up against a tier 9 medium tank, the patent tank, which is basically just a tier 9 heavy tank in disguise. It's basically the same tank that we are driving, a bit faster, and it doesn't have the same alpha damage with its 120mm gun. Now, one thing I want to point out right there, first thing you'll notice when you watch my replays, shots go anywhere but at the target. That is something that I had to realize very, very quickly when I played this tank, because it just does not hit the targets when you're shooting it, especially at range. This tank is incredibly inaccurate, and it's just very frustrating to play when you basically have a tank that doesn't really work with the armor because of some serious bad weak spots, and then it also has a gun that is not reliable at all. Now you can see we're getting pushed now in the middle. It's not looking good for our team. I'm trying to put some pressure on this Type 4. And as you can see, I actually was aiming right at that weak spot, like the angled slopes of the Type 4 with heat rounds. And somehow I hit the tracks. I have no clue how it happened, but this tank has some horrible accuracy. The armor is pretty much non-existent. As you can see, we've been penned right through the weak spot on top. We've been penned through the lower plate. If they have the ability to shoot your side, they're going to go right through there as well. And it's just a very big old target. This vehicle has a very large silhouette. It's a very big target, and even in a hull down position, it doesn't really fare very well because of the very big weak spot that you have on top. So it's very frustrating to play. Right here you can see as well the heat rounds that you have on this thing. They allow you about 300mm of penetration, which I would say for a tier 9 heavy is decent. It's nothing to write home about. But yeah, the AP shells are going to let you down quite often, especially with the pen, since you only have, 240mm of penetration. And you're going to feel it when you're going up against tier 9 heavies and, tier 10 vehicles. It's not going to be running in your favor. Now, the armor is not very reliable. The gun is suspect at best. I have to be honest. I'm using a lot of equipment to really get the best out of the gun. I'm trying to get the gun to actually work in a way where I can have a reliable gun, and I don't even want to go for the highest DPM, because the terrible dispersion when you're trying to aim in and shoot a target that is far away really makes it such an awkward tank to play. You have to have a fully aimed in reticle to be able to hit something at a distance, even up close. And it just doesn't work when you have a fully aimed in reticle and you shoot a tank that is maybe, let's say, about 400 or 500 meters away, which I know is like quite far away in terms of World of Tanks combat engagement distance. There are a lot of times where your rounds just fall flat. They hit the ground, they go anywhere but at the target, and it's so frustrating because you have this terrible DPM, you have a gun that is just not reliable, you have armor that is suspect at best, and overall you basically have a vehicle that just doesn't feel like it should be in World of Tanks in the year 2023 or in the year 2024. And I think that's exactly what this tank is. This is an old relic of a time where World of Tanks was very different from the way it is right now, and Wargaming have handed it out as a tier 9 premium heavy tank. I think this is probably one of the worst, if not the worst, tier 9 heavy tank in the game. And if I would have the choice between playing this and the M103, now if we would, completely ignore the premium capabilities of this vehicle and, just put them aside, I would probably enjoy the M103 a lot more than this thing. The M103 has a great gun. The M103 is about just as fast as this vehicle, about the same size. The M103 has a better turret in my opinion, even though the turret is also a little bit suspect in certain design choices. But it doesn't have this huge cupola on top, if I recall correctly. At least the cupola on the M103, it's still easy to pen, it's easy to hit as well, but this one right here is like it's a game-breaking cupola for this tank. So overall, as you can see, 2,700 damage dealt, 635 assisted. Now this is in a tier 9, tier 8, tier 7 matchup, where you would expect to be top in damage, and it's kind of difficult to do top damage when the vehicle is just not very reliable and is easily penned by majority of the enemy tanks. Now keep in mind, most of the vehicles will be firing gold, since firing premium ammunition is the standard of World of Tanks in the year 2024, and in that case you're just going to have a really tough time because the lower plate is really, really thin. Now we did make some serious misplays there because we were trying to engage the Type 4 while the Kampfpanzer 07 and the Type 57 were engaging us. But obviously, sometimes you're going to get hit, and when you get hit, it's not going to look very pretty. The next game, I hopefully can show you just what the maximum is you can take out of this vehicle if you play it to its strengths, and when you really have enemies that are not as well versed in the way of dealing with American heavies, and how you can make the most out of the vehicle. But we're going to talk about still the shortcomings of the vehicle, because you can even see it when it is in a good position. It's going to have some serious drawbacks, especially in terms of the DPM and the gun reliability, not allowing you to be a very effective tool against an enemy that you can take advantage of. Let's switch over to that replay, and hopefully I can show you guys the best ideal scenario for the T54 heavy. What you can see is the second replay. We're playing on Siegfried line. This time around we're going into the city. We are going up against tier 8 vehicles, tier 9s. That's basically it. And I think this is a perfect kind of matchup for this tank, because tier 7 usually you don't have enough HP around to do a lot of damage. But even tier 7s are kind of dangerous to this tank, especially if they are able to pen your lower plate. So right there we get a very nice shot into the AMX 1390. I want to advise or show you just how long it takes to reload this gun. So damage per minute, not very good, especially for a bad kind of gun, a gun that doesn't really work as well. You'd expect it to maybe at least have a better rate of fire. But yeah, it's basically a gun that doesn't have a good rate of fire, doesn't have good gun characteristics, and overall it's just a little bit of a disappointment. But still, one thing that is very nice about this tank is that it actually has some serious alpha damage. 450 alpha damage instead of the 400 for the standard American 120mm gun that you have on the E5 and the M103 and also the patent tank. So yeah, 450 alpha damage, that's 50 alpha damage more with a single shot. That's pretty nice if you can get your barrel or your gun to actually hit the target. Now, the penetration is not something I would write home about. 240mm is, well, it's okay, but having a 120mm gun, most of the time you'd expect to at least have 258, maybe 260mm of penetration, at least for a tier 9 vehicle. But I think 240mm, you can make it work, especially if you know the weak spots of vehicles. And if that's not the case, well, you still have the trusty 300mm of pen with the heat rounds, even though 300mm of pen is not the best in this category. Now, one thing that we also have to recommend about this tank, or commend, is its 12 degrees of gun depression, but which also comes in with this very terrible cupola on top, which means that even though you have 12 degrees of gun depression, the cupola is always going to expose you to fire, and it's a very easy cupola to hit. So if you're in a close quarter fight, as I am right here with this this T54, who is now obviously going to be reloading after this round, he puts right into the side of me. You can do some serious damage when you hit the target. But every single time you move, you can see how bad the dispersion gets. Now, the dispersion is only terrible if you are moving the tank. The dispersion is actually not that horrible if you're only moving the turret. What you can see right now is I'm trying to get a shot on this T54 so that we can take him out of the game, and I'm just hoping for him to make a bad play, maneuver himself into the window, and then take a pop shot. And you can see we are successful with that, leaving him on 78 HP, and now it's going to be easy pickings, at least if he stays in that position. He is already kind of doomed, as you can see. He's not going to move anywhere else, and as he's moved into this position to the right, that allows us to take care of him very, very quickly without any problem, because we have the gun depression, we have all of the armor, and we are able to take him out of the match. So far, we've done 2,311 damage, and to be fair, I much rather had 400 alpha damage, but a higher rate of fire, and maybe a more reliable gun, because then this tank would actually be more value to me. Because I really enjoy the way American heavy tanks play. I'm a big fan of the E5, I'm a big fan of the Renegade, even though both of them have the weak spots, but I just cannot fathom spending my time on a vehicle that has terrible gun characteristics, terrible gun stats, and also has the weak spots and, armor that is very suspect when you really need it to be reliable in certain situations. So overall, it's just a tank that doesn't feel like it is a part of the 2023-2024 World of Tanks, but more of a World of Tanks of the year 2015-2014, which probably is the case. This was a tank that was made way back. I remember that I think there were stats about this tank almost 10 years ago, or maybe even 10 years ago, and the same was with the patent, the tank. Both of them just not very good vehicles in their own right, sadly. Right there, we actually do bounce around from the Ferdinand. He was using the 88mm gun, and I think he bounced our upper plate. The upper plate, or no, actually, right there, the lower plate, or the seams, where the upper and the lower plate come together. We bounce another round, this time from the Renegade, because of the weird angle we have right there. So the armor is not completely useless when you're going up against lower tier opponents. But yeah, against most other vehicles, if they have a little bit of knowledge where to shoot, a rounded hull vehicle, they'll know how to pen it. Right there, we get very lucky with the Object 257. He doesn't hit the weak spot, and when you're in your face with this thing, there are actually certain times where you are able to, you know, not take any damage, but that's quite rare because the cupola is so big. It's still a very easy target to hit, and in the end, it's going to be your downfall in a lot of the fights when you're facing other vehicles that have like really tough, tough armor and no apparent weak spots. But overall, if you do get into these engagements where you can dictate your combat, you can dictate the pace of combat, you can see and you can decide who you're fighting and what kind of cover you're using. I think this tank can actually be an asset, but it still suffers from the unreliable gun. It suffers from its mobility, its size, its profile. It's a very easy target to hit. And just overall, you don't have the rate of fire to be a lone wolf. You cannot fight by yourself when you're playing this tank. You basically just have to have some reliable teammates that do help you out. And right there, very nice. It's always nice when you roll high with your 120mm gun, because we just rolled 492 damage right there instead of 350 or something like that. And that's a very nice feature to have, but I much rather have a reliable gun, same old 400 alpha damage, than have this tank with a very unreliable gun and have the additional alpha damage, because this is one of the rare games where you just basically get to fight against tanks that are not very active in the battle, and where you can almost farm the entire enemy team. I can show you guys a game where it's a very different story, where the enemy team actually does put up a fight, and where even tier 7 opponents very quickly take care of this thing. And I think that replay is going to be added here at the end, and that's going to be our final verdict as well. But yeah, so far this game is going to end any second now. They lose the SC-130 PM, and then they lose the Forest Spirit over there. We don't manage to take another hit at them or take another shot at them, and we finish with 4,280 damage, which is pretty damn good for this tank. This is the highest amount of damage I've been able to do, and I still lost almost all of my HP, because as soon as they managed to hit my lower plate, as soon as they managed to shoot the side of my turret, which is very large, you're going to lose a lot of HP. You don't want to get into a crossfire with this tank. It's very quickly taken care of. That's just the pleasure of playing an American heavy tank. This is the final replay I want to show you guys, and I just want to show a very brief interaction with the enemy team. You can see I actually fired at the 75 because I wanted to see how the ricochet damage looks like on the 75 side, and I think it looks really nice. Either way, we're playing on Pilsen, and we're going into the factory on the left side. And you'd think that a tank like this in the factory with a lot of little hills, rugged terrain, you're going to be able to use the 12 degrees of gun depression. And yeah, we're not going to get there immediately, but we are going to get there in a second. And what you can see right there is we bounced the M103, but we also don't manage to pen him because the gun is not very accurate. Even though we aimed at the lower plate, it basically went anywhere but there. And yeah, sadly, while crossing, we take a little pop shot from the IS-3, and that's 378 damage. Does hurt in the long run. But yeah, when we're playing Pilsen, I really like to go into this position. To be fair, not a very good start to the battle because our team has been quite defensive, and we immediately get shot by the T29. And that T29, I have no idea where the T29 hit me, but it was somewhere on the side. Everyone is basically firing standard rounds except for the T29. We get tracked by the Semovente, we get tracked by the Progetto 46. This is a very unfortunate situation for us to drive out. It took us way too long to get into position. And you can just see how devastatingly badly armored this thing is on the side. But we obviously gave them a little bit of a side profile, and that's just how quick they can get you. It's the same with the E5, it's the same with the Renegade. As soon as they have like a little bit of the ability of shooting towards your side, you're going to have a very tough time. And what you can also see here is that the armor does work once you are behind a little bit of a hill, but people will, and they know where the weak spot is, and they will shoot the weak spot. As you can see, the T29 immediately aimed for the cupola on top, and that basically means that we're gonna not be able to do a lot in this position. The IS-3 does bounce, and our shot at the VK, which was fully aimed, did not go anywhere near that thing. And yeah, you can see T29 waited for us to make a play, and he knocks us out of the game right then and there. So, what can I say about this tank? Even though we bounced 3,000 damage, basically, in that engagement, the armor on this thing is incredibly easy to bypass if you can just shoot the cupola. If you catch one of these bad boys out, like I was running right through here, it's easy pickings. The rate of fire is nowhere near good enough for you to fight back, at least in sensible terms. Now, I'm not expecting to be able to beat like 5 or 6 tanks, but at least to return fire against an IS-3. But turns out that even the alpha damage that we have, the advantage, 450, wasn't really that much of a deterrent against these guys. And the M103, I much rather would have been in the M103 in this engagement, because in the end, I would have had better protection with the cupola, which is smaller in the M103. I would have had a better gun, less alpha damage, but more DPM, and I would have been able to actually do a little bit of damage against the IS-3, maybe the T54. And you could just see, like, I fired off 2 shots that did damage. I fired off another one at the VK, and it was just going anywhere but at the target. And in the end, it's just a very unsatisfying tank to play if you try to play it as your average heavy tank. Now, that points to the question of how are you supposed to play the T54 Heavy? Now, that is a bit of a difficult question, because it always depends on what the team needs in that situation. Now, if you are the sole heavy tank, well, you're out of luck. You're probably going to have to play the heavy tank alley, and that means you're going to be probably one of the worst vehicles in that position, because you're very easy to take care of at further ranges, at closer ranges, because, the cupola on top is still a very big target, even at 400 meters. If you're a supporting heavy with other vehicles, such as tank destroyers and other heavy tanks, I think this tank can actually do a little bit of damage, especially if you keep a bit further back, or if you are not the first one to breach through an opening. That's probably where I see this vehicle being the most useful. This tank can barely shoot anything at medium range, and it's not going to be able to reliably shoot tanks at longer distances. So I cannot recommend this tank as a heavy sniping tank. I cannot recommend it as a brawler. I basically cannot recommend this tank at all. This tank does not get my seal of approval. This tank gets my seal of disapproval. This is a tank that I don't want anyone to buy. If you want to have a tank that is played like the T110E5, you want to have an American heavy tank with a reliable gun, hull down capabilities, go play the Renegade at tier 8. The Renegade is much better. It suffers from the same cupola on top, but it has a much better gun, it's much more reliable, it's faster, and overall it's just a better tank than T54 Heavy ever will be. That's all I can say about this tank. And yeah, I hope this review was helpful. Tell me your experiences with this tank. What were your experiences with the T54 Heavy? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? And I see you guys on the next video. Until then, have a good one.